Hi guys, and welcome back to Getting There, the podcast. In today's episode, I am joined by a special guest all the way from Los Angeles. It is none other than Dr. Joel Gator Walsh, an integrative paediatrician based in the US. Dr. Gator combines traditional and alternative approaches to medicine, focusing on individualized treatments for our children's health. Now, guys, we are living in a time of increasing division when it comes to medical opinions, with a growing distrust in mainstream healthcare. So today we dive deep into some of the most debated topics: vaccines, autism, radiation, and what it truly means to take a personalised approach to your child's well-being. This is a conversation that challenges perspectives and encourages open-minded discussion. So let's get into it. Hey Joel, how are you? And welcome to Getting There, the podcast. I feel like it's been a really long time coming. I think I found your page before Christmas and I was like, wow, this is a breath of fresh air. Because I feel like at the moment we're living in these polarising worlds, and then here you are, I feel like bang in the middle, common sense crew, taking truth from both sides and educating people. And then I fell down the rabbit hole of your life. I had a look into your book and everything that you're doing. So firstly, it is such an honour to have you on here all the way from America.
Thank you for having me on. It's a real honor to be on.
Great. So I guess my first question to you is, I always like to provide a bit of a background of my guests because I think it helps us understand where they are now to where they are going. But can you tell me a bit about your journey into medicine?
For sure. Yeah. So when I guess I always wanted to be a pediatrician. I always loved working with kids. I grew up in Canada and Toronto, used to coach my brother in hockey and baseball. You know, you got to play hockey and coach hockey, I guess, if you're Canadian. And so when I went to med school, it was always to become a pediatrician. I really loved, again, working with kids and trying to prevent illness and really get ahead of things. But as I was going through my training, I started to get a little bit frustrated with the system and medications for everything all the time and not really talking about prevention and watching chronic disease rates skyrocket. And also during that time, I met my now wife, who was very holistic minded, and that really opened up my eyes to a little bit of a different perspective. And as I have gone through practice over the last decade, I've really become interested in integrative medicine. And I'm not against Western medicine. I just think that we are far too quick to give a medication. Sometimes we need a medication, and we have a lot of amazing pharmaceuticals that can save your life, but we are now so focused on pharmaceuticals, and there's so much more out there, and what we're doing clearly isn't working in terms of chronic disease. The rates are just skyrocketing on every kind of chronic disease. And so that's really what led me to practice in integrative medicine and really focus on that.
So what is integrative medicine for anyone that's listening to this and like, oh, what do you mean?
To me, it means balancing the best of modern Western medicine with alternative practices. So not really shunning or dismissing anything, just being open to all the modalities out there and balancing the best of both worlds and trying to use things that have the most minimal side effects as possible whenever you can.
Because I feel like unless you've been living under a rock, since COVID, I feel for me has probably been the driving force. There's this massive mistrust in medicine or the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. And I'm wondering what you feel is driving that mistrust.
There's no question that that's true. Recent polls from before 2020 showed medicine had about 70% positive. You know, people thought positively of it, like 75%. Now it's like 40%. So there's no question that things have taken a nosedive, especially when it comes to vaccines. I think that is really a driving force behind a lot of this mistrust, and the pandemic certainly pushed that over the edge. I, as a pediatrician, never really felt comfortable talking about vaccines for the longest time. I really never talked about it openly. Obviously, I talked about it in the office, but never on podcasts or shows for many, many years, just because it was so controversial. And you ever talked about it, it created a war and caused so much issue. So I never did. And over the last several years, I've just seen how interested people are in really discussing it, but they don't feel comfortable talking about it publicly. And that's really what led me to write my book, Between a Shot and a Hard Place, because I feel like we need to talk about this. I feel like we need to have a discussion. I feel like we need to have debate. I'm not against vaccines. I think that we should be having discussions around vaccines. I think that people should be able to make their own choices and be informed. I don't tell anybody what to do. I don't tell people what to do in the office. I have never told people what to do online. I think that we need to discuss what we know and figure out what we don't know so we can continue to improve things and make sure people can make the decisions that are best for them. And I don't think that any resources out there really do that. Everything has a predetermined position when it comes to vaccines. It seems like either like they're the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world, and there's nothing in the middle. And everything is nuanced, and certainly vaccines are nuanced, and we need to be having these discussions, I think. And so that's what really led me to write the book. And I have no position for somebody to take. Like, I'm not trying to push people to do it or not do it. I just want to open up the discussion. I think we need to be having the discussion, and I'm excited to see that people are willing to have it. But certainly over COVID, to your question, I think that people felt like they couldn't talk about things, and they felt like they were forced to do things they didn't necessarily want to do. And we watched this pandemic unfold, and we watched the mixed messaging, and we watched being told things like safe and effective, as opposed to, based on the information that we know, it seems like the benefits
new and
outweigh.
trialing or something.
Yeah, like you can't know long-term safety until it's been long-term. So to say that something is safe is just a lie. It's just a propaganda. Like, it's not a full truth. You can't say that something's safe until you know that it's safe. And I think people watch that.
Hi guys, me again. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but I have to tell you about Myco. Now, if you've been following me for even 5 minutes, you'll know I've been shouting from the rooftops about how functional mushrooms have completely changed my life. Brain fog's gone, my sleep is sorted, anxiety is down, and my energy is up. Now, a lot of you have been asking which mushrooms I use myself, and the answer is Myco's liquid mushroom extracts. All of Myco's extracts are grown in small batches in the UK. They are 100% organic and completely alcohol-free. These are truly the highest quality functional mushrooms available on the market. But guys, don't just take my word for it. Go and try it yourself. Go to mycodrink.com and use code Brogan for 10% off. Thank me later.
I mean, definitely for me, I feel that my whole life, my mother was a dentist, so she was quite medically, we had like a medical background, if you know what I mean. And it wasn't until 2020 happened and I felt that on a personal level, something was being pushed on me. And then that made me look into the COVID vaccine. But not only that, then made me look more into like the childhood vaccines. And I think as a community, we started to shift and question everything else, you know, question the things that we had been told for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the pandemic opened people's eyes. Some people were already questioning, but a lot of people were not. And they watched what happened and they wonder, if I'm being lied to about this, if this is what people are being told, if I'm watching this happen, then what else is going on? What else am I being lied to about? What else do we not know all the information about? And more than ever, people come into the office and just don't want to do anything anymore. They're just like, I don't trust anything. And we see that with statistics. I don't know the numbers where you are, but I'm sure it's very similar because from everything I've seen around the world, it's pretty similar. But certainly in the US, the hesitancy rates are the highest they've ever been. The unvaccinated rates are the highest they've ever been. The kindergarten rates of not being fully vaccinated are the highest they've ever been. The trust in medicine is the lowest it's ever been. So the very thing that medicine is trying to do in terms of promoting vaccines, they're actually creating the hesitancy that they are trying to prevent. And it's really ironic, but I think this lack of discussion is really creating hesitancy because people don't trust the fact that they can't even ask questions. And I think that's reasonable. You should feel like you should be able to ask questions. We don't have to know everything, but we should always be trying to make things safer and work the best possible and decrease the risks. And it doesn't seem like that's happening.
No. And in your training or like in general, in terms of the training that a doctor would go through, how much are they educated about every single ingredient that's inside the vaccine? Because am I right in saying that the ingredients of the vaccines have added more and more every year. Like somebody said to me there's 72 ingredients in there now, whereas years ago there could have been like 10 ingredients. So the actual vaccines in themselves have a lot more ingredients in them.
Well, I would say this. People are more concerned than ever about what is in the vaccines. We're certainly not taught very much about that. When you go through training, you're taught about what vaccines are on the schedule. You're taught about the diseases. You're taught about the common side effects, that kind of thing. But you really don't discuss vaccine safety. You really don't discuss the ingredients that much in the vaccines, if at all. It's really just like, oh yeah, these are good, these work, this is what you should do, this is what you promote for your patients. And that's really what I learned. I don't know that there's more ingredients. I think you're more referring to the amount of vaccines or the antigen in vaccines. Yeah. So there certainly are a lot more vaccines than there were when we were growing up. A lot of vaccines started or were approved in the 90s and early 2000s. So there are many, many more vaccines than there were just a few decades ago. And that's got some positives and some negatives. I mean, certainly you can protect against more diseases, so that part's good. But we have so many vaccines now, and it's a lot more than we had when we were growing up. And so parents have concerns, like, I'm giving my kid 4 vaccines on this day, I'm giving my kid multiple vaccines in a year, then is it too much? Is it causing an issue? How is it related to long-term disease? These are all questions that parents have that they don't feel are being answered appropriately.
Why is there so many more vaccines?
I think it's multiple factors. Number one, I mean, we're just longer in time, so we have more vaccines, we have more research, we have approved more vaccines for diseases, so they're preventing against things that you can prevent diseases from. So I think that's one factor. The second big factor is in 1986, there was the Vaccine Act, which took away liability from vaccine manufacturers, so it made it a lot easier to get vaccines on the market. So I think it's those two factors together. I mean, any vaccine on the market is good and bad. It's good if it works, doesn't cause side effects, and prevents you from dying, right? That's a good thing. Yeah. But anything can have side effects too. And so if it becomes too easy to get a product on the market, if we're not safety testing it to the best possible means, then you can have consequences which you're not aware of, especially if the only people that are studying it are the companies that are making the products. Then you can't necessarily trust them to be completely honest.
So let's bring that back to talking in line with the COVID vaccine. Do you believe that was too much in the trial phase to have been offered to people?
It's a tough question. And COVID vaccine is a very interesting one because it's almost like there are two different worlds when it comes to the COVID vaccine. If you look at what's going on now, one world of individuals would say it's the best thing ever, and it saved millions of lives, and it saved trillions of dollars. And then the other world says it's the worst thing ever, and it's killing a lot more people, and it's caused so many problems. And it's really hard to know exactly what is true because both those worlds don't seem to talk to each other. They don't seem to debate. And you read research and data and information, and it all seems reasonable and plausible. And so it makes it really difficult to know what is true or what is not true. I am of the belief that, if you have a pandemic, if you have something going on that's urgent, then you only have so much time to do something. So it's not the same standards as what we would have if something's just coming out in the long run. You have to get something out. You can't wait 10 years for that. So I think that you have to balance the risks versus the benefits. But to me, the issue is not in getting the vaccine out. It's in the messaging around the vaccine and any sort of forcing people to do something, especially when something is rushed out or brought out really quickly. If you want to take it, you should be able to take it. I think that's true for any vaccine. If you want it for you, if you want it for your kids, fine. You should know what the benefits are. You should know what the risks are, and you should be able to do it. You shouldn't be forced to do it. And I think that's where the issue is. And I do think that that's where a lot of the pushback has come from, because people feel like if they were forced to do the COVID vaccine, then what else are they going to be forced to do in the future? What else is going to come out? What else is going to be mandated for whatever that someone doesn't feel like they should take? And that, to me, if we would just get rid of these mandates, would probably calm a lot of people down, I think, because I don't think that almost anybody's against vaccines as a concept. Like, the concept is good. Yeah. You give your kid a pill or a medicine or a poke and they don't get sick and die from a disease. That's good, right? Of course, that's good, but that's not the whole story. The question is at what cost? And I think that we don't have that part of the conversation enough.
But a lot of the see, I don't know too much about it, but like for example, what are the odds of you actually getting polio or Hep B now? They must be pretty slim.
Polio is extremely slim, so there really isn't or hasn't been polio in America in a very long time.
So surely that's enough for you to like then take that out of the vaccine, because for me, like I say, I just think I have a general thought process like most of the population, but obviously we've been mass immunized years ago. So is it worth the risk of them putting polio in a vaccine now?
It's a very good question that should be asked, right? I mean, that is an appropriate question, and the answer to that question still is nuanced, because the reality of a lot of these diseases is if they still exist in the world, then if people stop vaccinating, then your risk starts to increase. So that's a question of a nuanced approach that maybe you could minimize the amount of doses you're giving people. Maybe you could give them later. Maybe you could make it optional. Maybe you could make it optional with the caveat that if it starts to increase again, then we would bring it back. I mean, these are a lot of questions that people would have. I think that's reasonable. Same thing with hepatitis B. I mean, there are lots of cases of hepatitis B. There always are. But it's a lot lower than it used to be because people are vaccinated now against it. But one of the, if not the biggest controversy in vaccines, is giving hepatitis B to a 1-day-old baby. I think that's a huge controversy that really deserves a nuanced discussion, because it really was introduced as a public health measure and not really on the individual level. And a lot of parents really say, like, my kid really has no chance to get hepatitis B. Why am I giving them a vaccine on the first day of life? And I think that's a reasonable question. But
what about the rising rates of autism? Do you think they're correlated to the vaccines? Because I was listening to a podcast that you said it was 1 in 25,000 years ago. Sorry, 1 in 25,000 a decade ago, or was it 20 years ago, had autism, and now in California it's 1 in 22.
Yeah, so it used to be more decades ago that much. Then 1 in 250 about 2 decades ago, so about 2000, and then it's 1 in 36 now in America and 1 in 22 in California, where I am. So those numbers are staggering. They're increasing rapidly. There certainly is some part of that that's better diagnosis, for sure. I mean, we're certainly more aware of it and we're talking about it more, but that doesn't explain what's going on. I don't think that even begins to explain what's going on. There certainly is a lot that's contributing to autism. I don't think it's one thing, but when it comes to autism and vaccines, I was always taught that they have nothing to do with it, right? I mean, that's what we're taught in med school. It's like they have nothing to do with it. The science is settled. We know that the science is settled. You're a crazy crackpot for even asking the question. Don't talk about this. And anybody that talks about it, it's like, oh, it's been debunked. It's, the science is settled. And when I went to write the book, even at that point, I still was under the impression that there was a lot of research to show that vaccines do not cause autism. And when I'm trying to write the chapters, trying to write a balanced approach, talking about things like RFK and what he says, Paul Offit, like showing both sides. And I assumed what I was going to find was, well, here are the really good studies that show that vaccines do not cause autism. And here are the other studies that show that maybe there's some association. So this is why there's this controversy. And I was so shocked when I went through it, how little research there actually was on vaccines and autism. So you certainly cannot say that vaccines cause autism. You would have to have research to show that. But you can also certainly not say that the science is settled. There is very little research, like a shockingly little amount of research on vaccines and autism. And really the research that is available is about MMR and thimerosal. So thimerosal being the mercury that has been taken out of most vaccines. So it's really just about MMR, the research that you have. And the research on MMR, for the most part, is kids that got MMR versus kids that didn't get MMR in the setting of having their other vaccines. And let's keep in mind that you get your MMR when you're 1 year old, but you're getting a whole bunch of vaccines before then. So you can't say anything about vaccines because you have to study the other vaccines, DTaP, pneumococcus,
right,
Hib. Like, you need studies on that too. And we don't actually have that, at least nothing that I could find. And I tried to read every single paper, every single book. I read Paul Offit's book and Peter Hotez's book and all these people that are super pro-vax, and they had the very same research. So I think the reason why people say vaccines are proven not to cause autism is because it's never proven to cause autism. So it's like a backwards wording. It's not that they have been disproven. It's that no research shows that no research that they claim is good research shows that there's any sort of correlation. So
do you
it's just
think
kind of
now
backwards
that
talking.
they'll start looking into creating these studies now that Trump's in power?
Yeah, I think so. I think they are going to look into it. I think it's going to be a lot of pushback, but it needs to happen. It absolutely must happen for our kids. I don't know if vaccines have anything to do with autism. They may have nothing to do with it, but we should be looking into it. With the amount of parents that say that their kid was totally fine one day and then the next day they were not. We need to trust moms. It's ridiculous that we don't. I mean, dads too, but moms have a special bond, and I trust moms more than anything in the office. And when so many people are saying the same thing, you have to take note of that. And it's not that these people are crazy crackpot anti-vaxxers. These are people that went to get vaccinated. So they believe in vaccines. They went in to get vaccines. And what reason do they have to lie about what they're saying? It might not be true. Like, it might be just correlation. Maybe, you got a vaccine today, you had a heart attack this afternoon, it has nothing to do with it. That happens too. But when so many people have the same story, you have to wonder, okay, like, we have to get this information. We have to take it seriously. We have to look into it, because if there is some association, if there is something in the vaccines that has something to do with autism, autoimmune conditions, whatever it is, we owe it to our kids to figure that out. Not to stop vaccinating, but maybe there's an ingredient that we could change. Maybe there's a different schedule we could do. Maybe there's a certain genetic makeup that makes kids more like unless we identify that it's possible that there's some association, we can't make it better. And our goal is to have healthier kids, not to have vaccinated kids, right? We want kids to be healthy and protected. So we have to figure out what the truth is so that we can move forward and have our kids be the healthiest. And maybe that has something to do with vaccines, maybe it doesn't, but we don't know that unless we look for it.
And what about the term autism? It seems so broad. Like, when I looked up some of the symptoms, there were so many that, quite easily a few people could box tick them. Are we, by having the autism sphere or spectrum so broad, then actually discrediting the amount of people who are, I don't want to say hugely, but acutely autistic, that need the care and attention? So that if it has risen so much, then the people that really need the care and attention aren't getting it as much.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I think that part of the rise of autism in terms of diagnosing is it actually helps you get more services, because once you get the diagnosis, then you're kind of in this lump of kids that are qualified for services. But I think, to your point,
because my point is, once everyone's got autism, like 1 in 22, no one's got autism. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't.
Yes. So I do, and that's what I think.
And I feel like that about ADHD as well. Like, now everyone's got ADHD. We're missing the people that have the acute symptoms of ADHD.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a couple points there. So number one, I think autism is many things. I think that's the first problem that we have. It's a catch-all diagnosis, but there are probably many different reasons why people get the diagnosis of autism. So we have to, I think, separate them a little bit better to help people in different ways, because I think it's multiple different things. And to your point of, if everybody has ADHD, if everybody has autism, then, well, that's just the normal at that point. But we have to, I think, separate out the like severe versus the not as severe, because that way you can give the appropriate services to the people that need it based on their symptoms. And given there are just so many people that have these diagnoses, it's becoming overwhelming to the system, where there just isn't an availability to help the kids that really need it, because other individuals might have the diagnosis but not need those exact same support settings. So I think we do need to separate it a little bit. I think that would help.
And what would you say the core symptoms for autism are?
It depends on how severe, but usually it's social and communication. So having trouble communicating, repetitive behaviors, lack of eye contact, those kinds of things.
And I know gut issues can be a problem for children with autism as well.
Yeah, gut issues, definitely.
What is the likelihood of you giving a young child a healthy diet? Would that be able to eradicate the symptoms of autism? Or do you believe that once you have a diagnosis, you're kind of limited to what you could do?
I think it depends on the root cause of why you have your autism diagnosis in the first place. And that goes back to, I think there are many different, versions of it. Some might be exposure to toxins, some might be a gut imbalance, some might be a brain hypoxia, like oxygen insult. Maybe something was before birth. So I think there are many different reasons, and depending on the reason, you can certainly have treatments and supports that can help children in different ways. I think that gut health is extremely important and certainly would be a part of any sort of plan if you're looking at something integratively that would be helpful for a child. There certainly are some kids that have been given the diagnosis of autism and have worked with integrative practitioners and have seen those diagnoses go away or certainly symptoms improve drastically. So I can't imagine that thinking about gut health would have any problems for children. I think that's something that's reasonable for everybody. We should all be thinking about our gut health. I think if we improve our gut health, it's going to improve our health in general. But I would say it's a reasonable place to start. It's a good place and thing to think about for any child who has autism and any family who's working with a child with autism. But it really does depend on the root cause of where you're getting your symptoms from. And I think that varies a lot.
So say, for example, you'd had your child had been diagnosed with autism at 2 and was a perfectly healthy child. What are the first steps that you would take that are in your power to try and help alleviate those symptoms?
I would, if you could work with somebody, not all the practitioners that do the deep dives are as affordable for everybody, but if you can do it, I would work with somebody who works with autism on a daily basis. Maybe that's all that they do, and can really do a deep dive into their background and their history and their general health. And there are a lot of functional integrative tests that can go a little bit deeper. I mean, certainly you want to do some generalized lab work, but you can do blood work to look at their nutrition profile. You can look at their metals in their body. You can do gut health and stool testing. So you can get a better picture of what's going on and see if there are any obvious imbalances. I think that's a good place to start for a lot of these kids. And then just like you said, diet. Most kids are not eating a great diet. So we want to make sure they're getting the nutrients to support their brain. So whether that's a multivitamin or different vitamins that are targeted, as well as trying to minimize the sugar, the processed foods, the chemicals, and try to increase the veggies and the fruit. Obviously, that's even harder with autistic children sometimes. I mean, sometimes the hardest population to get healthy food into, but these are the things that we should be thinking about, because a big part of it oftentimes that they are so picky and then they're really not getting the nutrients that they need. So it's a cycle where things progressively get worse because they're not getting the nutrients that they need, versus if you can change that cycle, then you do nourish their body, you nourish their brain, and you can see those symptoms start to improve.
And I know this might be quite a personal question, I guess, but what do you think is the driving rate of the autism? Like, how much of it do you think is to do with toxins and how much we're exposed to in the current day and age that we live in?
I think it's a mixture of genetics and toxins. I do. I think that there must be some predisposition genetically for certain people that make them more susceptible. And certainly there are a lot of studies coming out that show that genetics does play a factor. But the only thing that makes sense to me on the grander scale, but taking a step back, is environment, is toxins, because the rate has changed so much in just a few decades. It can't be that our genetics has changed so much that we're just having a lot more kids with autism. We're diagnosing it more. We're more aware of it. That's certainly one piece. But I would say probably the vast majority of it is the increased exposure to all sorts of toxins, and that mixing with our personal genetics. I think that is the driving force for this rapid rise.
And for anyone that's listening to this podcast and is like, right, how can I limit the amount of toxins that myself and my family are exposed to? What are the easiest, simplest tips that you could give people that they could implement straight away?
The first thing to do is to be conscious of it. We just were marketed to for so long growing up that, faster, cheaper, easier, buy the thing that has the colorful picture. You have to be an active consumer, thinking about everything that you purchase from now on, and really just trying to read the ingredients, read the labels, think about what you're purchasing, and try to buy things which you actually know what they are, real words, minimize the pesticides as much as you can. If you're buying something that you're spraying on your clothes or spraying on yourself or makeup or anything like that, everything that you buy, you can really be thoughtful and read the ingredients and just try to minimize the chemicals in there. We're not going to get rid of all chemicals, but I think if you decrease it by 5, 10, 15%, because you're being a more mindful consumer, your body can handle a lot. We're lucky. I mean, we can detoxify pretty well, but clearly we're at a point where it's just too much. So anything you can do to just minimize that exposure, I think is helpful. And I think if we just even look at the rates from now till just a couple of decades ago, it's so vastly different that we don't have to change things drastically to decrease our risk, which is good. I think that's empowering to realize that if we just minimize our exposure a little bit, then probably that's enough for our bodies to handle it. But I think that we're at a point now where adults and children are so exposed to so many chemicals that is throwing us over the edge. And whether they get diagnosed with autism or some sort of autoimmune condition or a mental health condition, I think it expresses itself in different ways in different people, depending on what you're exposed to in your genetics. But ultimately, it's that exposure mixed with the fact that we're just eating crappy food all the time. And so you're not getting the nutrients that you need to have a healthy gut and have a healthy body. So we have not enough nutrients, too many toxins. How do you expect to be healthy? There's no way we're going to be if that's true.
Hi guys, I'm Brogan from Getting There, the podcast, and I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Guys, I am completely obsessed with London Nootropics. They use the top quality adaptogens, and I know I'm fueling myself with the good stuff. It helps me feel alive and like the lights are turned on without the jitters. Honestly, I'm obsessed. Use code Getting There for 20% off. Let me know what you think.
Yeah, I was watching somewhere that they said that we would have a credit card worth of microplastics in our body at the moment, living in this day and age.
Yeah, I've heard, I mean, there's a large portion of your brain, a reasonable portion of your brain is microplastics at this point. They found microplastics in everybody's testicles that were studied. Like it's pretty insane what we're exposed to. So I think that we can't stop all chemicals and toxins, but we have to be mindful and minimize whatever we can, wherever we can. I mean, I guess you can move to the mountains and start a commune or something like that if you want to, but but that's not reasonable for most people. So for most people that live in a city, you just have to be conscious and get a lot of plants for your house and get a filter for your water and try to buy your
I want to talk to you about the water, Joel. Okay, so we had someone on the other week and she was talking about water and saying how dirty the water in London is, which is where we are. And I was like, yeah, I know that. I've always known that. That's why I'm bougie. I drink Evian. And she was like, no, dude, like there's some serious plastics in there. So we went and got the TSD, the total soluble dissolve monitor. And the water in London, I think it was 368, and you shouldn't be drinking anything over 50. And my Evian, Joel, was 333. I was like, what the hell? I'm spending £5 on a bottle of water and it's still killing me. I promise you, Joel, I stood back. I was like, oh my God, I need to get a filter. I need to fix this. And it wasn't until I measured that for myself that I came to understand, oh my goodness, that is so dangerous. And from that led me down the rabbit path of buying this filter. And I was speaking to a gentleman about it. And I said, but I thought my water was coming from the Swiss Alps. And he was like, yeah, at a tap at the bottom of the Alps that is no different to anywhere else. I think I'd envisaged this lovely farm girl going up, collecting my water, doing it up and sending it back in a truck. But obviously that wasn't the case. And the amount of microplastics that I must have been drinking as well. And then we did another experiment. I boiled the tap water from London. So I took it out of the tap and I boiled it. And I thought in my head that would get rid of any toxicity, because that's what we're taught. We boil it and we go and it will go. And it went up to 600 because they said when fluoride's boiled, it can multiply. So when we measured it, it was 600.
Great. Wonderful.
Crazy.
So, it is crazy.
What chance do we have if no one knows that? Like that amount of water that we're drinking and making tea every day, I imagine the water's not as bad over there, I imagine.
I think it's pretty bad in LA. So,
yeah.
I mean, it depends where you are, certainly, but I think that most of what we're exposed to has been contaminated at this point. And again, that is why I think people are so sick, because literally anything you do has this exposure. And it doesn't mean that we need to be terrified or frightened. Like our bodies can handle a little bit, and I'm sure they were contaminated before too. So I don't think that's changed, that it's so much more contaminated. I think it just is contaminated and has been for a while. But I think we're just exposed to more and more and more chemicals. And so we just have to be mindful to do whatever we can wherever we can. And it's like, you have to drink water, so you got to drink something. I don't know if there's like the perfect water, unless you do know somebody that can go grab your water from the Swiss Alps, I guess. That's great, or you can move there, but it's not reasonable for most people. I mean, you have to eat food from the grocery store, you have to drink water, so just get the best sources that you can with as minimal chemicals as reasonable, and take small steps like getting a filter. And it's not going to be perfect, but at least it'll decrease it a little bit. And that's probably enough. I mean, most people are still, and we're still healthy.
Yeah, and I think it's
20 years
about
ago.
the micro changes, right? We think it's going to be this one big thing that's going to come along and save us, but like you're saying, it's really about the small steps, about what is in your food, limiting the pesticides that are in that, getting a water filter, and just limiting it. But one of my questions is, and a lot of my friends think I'm crazy, but I feel that we are getting like electrocuted by our phones. I'm like, surely this is giving out so much radiation. Especially post-COVID, I feel like everyone has their phone in their hand, you know, especially children who were on gaming sets all day long talking to each other. We would be foolish to not think that there's going to be a side effect from this. What are your thoughts on, is it radiation, PMF? What is it that's coming out the phone?
Yeah, we are getting electromagnetic, EMFs from phones and from everything. And I believe we're going to look back in 20, 30 years and be like, what were we thinking? I think that we're made of cells, right? We're made of energy, and anything that's going through us or near us constantly probably affects us. Phones as a concept, especially cell phones, are still quite new. And certainly we continually make them stronger and more powerful. And I would presume through, just common sense, that the stronger they get, the more powerful they are, then the more chance that it's going to affect people. Now, whether the phones at this point are really affecting us in any significant degree, still up for debate for sure. But I don't think we should assume that it's not affecting us at all. So I think that it certainly has to, right? Like the moon affects the tides, right? Like these things all affect each other. So it's not like woo woo to be like, oh, I'm holding a thing that's sending out signals, and signals are coming back and forth all the time. That doesn't have any influence on me. If
They're
it has
traveling through me, right?
Right. If to have enough influence to make you sick or to cause a problem, I think that's something to be seen in the future. But I would say, without any question, the stronger they get, the more powerful they are, the more it's going to affect people, and the more it's going to affect certain people. So I think it is something that isn't woo-woo, that we should be mindful of, that we should be aware of, and we should continue to think about. And at least from a personal perspective at this point, I think it's safe to assume that those things are not completely safe. So just try not to keep it on you as much as you can. Keep it away from you. Don't sleep beside it.
I've
Turn it
got
off
a
when you
PMF
don't need it.
protector on there as well.
Yeah, all those things I think are just reasonable common sense steps to take. And at least at this point, I mean, I don't think that it's causing mass problems probably yet. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe that's part of the issues, but let's just assume that it's not. Then whatever kind of symptoms is causing you, minimize it by just not keeping it on you and keeping it away from you.
But they're made to be addictive, aren't they?
Sure they are.
Yeah, like we had a lady on here in 2020 that was talking about 2020, and she works with children who have brain cancers, and she was saying, like, what was everyone doing in 2020? They were trying to work from home. You were giving your child the phone or the iPad or the laptop, and they were on these gaming stuff. And she says the rates of childhood brain cancers they've seen has skyrocketed here in the UK. And she believes that's to do with the wireless radiation of children sitting at gaming devices all day.
I mean, we're seeing such a rapid rise of many types of cancer, especially younger children or younger adults with cancer. So it's hard to blame it on any one thing, because it's probably not one thing. It can't be just one thing. It's probably all of these things we've talked about. And I would imagine that phones don't help the situation in any way, or the EMFs don't help the situations in any way. I'm sure if we saw all the beams of energy coming back and forth from phones and satellites and all these things, we'd be terrified. How that affects us, I don't know. I mean, who knows? I don't think we know that fact yet, and it's going to be hard to kind of parse that out. But technology is moving, and that's one thing that's true. So I just go back to, well, what can you actually do? And just try to manage the things that you can actually have some sort of control over, and just be mindful of those things. And that's the most that you could do. Again, you can move to the mountains, you can move away from having Wi-Fi, you can eat your own farm, and that's all great. And, maybe that's a good thing, but most people are not going to do that. So I don't think it's useful to be terrified of everything, but at the same time, I think it's good to be mindful.
So how do you implement balance in your household around devices and food?
Well, food, we really do prioritize. We really try to get the best fresh food that we can. We try to get it from either farmers markets or really good markets, or we go to a place that gets everything from farms. So most of our produce is really from farms. We try to cook every meal when we're at home. So really nothing that's mass produced, or very minimal that's mass produced. I think that's a huge factor. And then for me, I really try to keep my phone off and away from me as much as possible. It's hard because I'm a doctor, so people text me, so it's kind of a unique situation. If I wasn't a doctor, then I would probably just turn my phone off totally and keep it away from me most of the time, but I don't have that luxury. But I think that's useful. Having the Wi-Fi on a timer so it's not going in the middle of the night helps. And those are the big ones. Just trying to be mindful as much as possible, and also just getting outside, exercising. I think all those things help.
And what about your children? Are they old enough to be on devices?
They are, well, I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, so they're not on devices very much. I mean, a little bit TV here and there, not really playing games yet or anything like that, except for traveling. So it's still not a huge issue yet. It's a coming though.
Yeah. So at what age would you allow your 5-year-old to have access to an iPad?
Access to it? I mean, I think for very specific situations, it's reasonable at if you're like traveling on a plane, things like that. Other than that, I probably would just go as long as possible and just minimize it as much as you can. I'm not fully against screens. I think they have a purpose and they can be really helpful for parents, but we don't want our kids addicted to screens. We don't want them not running around outside, not playing. So I think, as opposed to not being able to go to the bathroom or having a screaming kid or having a crazy, car ride when it's going to be 4 hours, then a little bit of screen time at those specific situations doesn't really bother me so much as we're seeing teens on average 7 to 9 hours a day on screens.
Jesus.
That does bother me. So I think we need to minimize it and use it as a tool, but try to really focus on getting kids back outside and playing and socializing as opposed to being on screens. That's where I would put my focus, because I think we're going to get a lot more health benefits from worrying about that than the parent who's worried their kid's watching 5 minutes of a cartoon. I don't think that matters that much. We all watched TV when we were little. I think that's okay in small doses.
Yeah, there's no way somebody can be spending 7 to 9 hours on a phone and there not be some kind of side effects, even to their eyes. Because it's a huge strain.
Well, it's very simple. I mean, what are you not doing if you're on the screen for 9 hours? You're not outside, you're not moving, you're not active. So to me, it's what you're not doing that's by far the biggest concern. And then, of course, like you said, like you're on a screen, you're watching, it's affecting your brain. There's electromagnetics going all around you the whole time. So all these things have to affect you. And that's not even, mentioning any of the like mental health side effects of being on screens and social media, which have their own
problems with it as well. Because for me, it's children very much adapt that as a real world as such. And, I've watched members of my family who are younger take their self-esteem from the number of likes they'll get on a picture or something. And that to me is such a worrying part. And children have been integrated with social media and, online much earlier on than we were. And it's really hard for the brain to decipher what's real and like what's not. Because that is real to them, that kind of world.
It very much is. I mean, they've grown up with it. And even for adults, it's very difficult to navigate that world. So I don't think that kids and teens have a really good chance to, not have major concerns with being on social media. I mean, the number one thing that kids want to be these days is an influencer. Like it's a big problem. Yeah. It's a really big problem. And I don't think it's the same issue as, when people were growing up many years ago, it's like, oh, they're listening to rock music, or, oh, their brains are going to be fried like by TV or something. This is very different, I think, because it's so addictive. It's built to be addictive and it's sucking up so much time. I think if kids were on social media for like 20 minutes a day, it's not the end of the world, but you can be on it for hours and hours and hours and get your validation from getting 15 likes. And I think that is creating a generation of serious problems, or at least it's contributing to it. And the statistics don't lie. I mean, if the statistics were fine, if we were seeing decreases in mental health concerns and suicide and all these things, I wouldn't be so concerned. But everything has skyrocketed. Mental health concerns are a disaster, and just continue to get worse. And really, were absolutely terrible during the pandemic, and it hasn't really slowed down at all. So I think it's a big problem, a huge problem, and a big part of it is screens, and a big part of it that we can actually affect. I mean, a lot of places are starting to be aware of this, which is great. And schools in certain areas are taking phones out of school, and people are talking about it more. So I think that's good. And maybe we can find a little bit more balance for kids, and I think that's the place to go. I think it's gonna be hard to get kids off of screens totally at this point, but I think we can find a little better balance. And other countries do it. I mean, I don't love a lot of what like places like China do, but they don't let kids on screens after like 7 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever the time is. Like they have a lot more controls, and I think those are the types of things that we could have implemented here, where we have a little bit more boundaries, whatever that might be, to just minimize the ability for kids to be on things for long periods of time. I think that would help.
100%. And what advice would you give to anyone who's listening to this podcast and is worried about their teenager getting their self-esteem from social media? How do you implement a child's self-esteem away from that?
So I think there are two big questions for that. Number one, if you have a younger teen, or even a young, like somewhere between like 4 and 10 years old, then try not to give them social media. Really try it. I think that's key. Just don't let them on for as long as possible. I think that's really helpful. That's really the trend where people are moving to, and the age is getting older and older. That is recommended. So I think if you haven't started it yet, try to hold them off. But it is a much harder thing to do once they're on there, because they feel like they're missing out and their friends are on it. So start with conversations. I mean, start by talking to them, asking them questions, see how they're doing. Don't shy away from the conversation. And as best as you can, I talk to families about really trying to create some time where they're off of those screens. So, you can make some rules in your home, like you can't have your phone in your room when you go to bed. You can have rules like we don't have any phones at the table when we're having dinner. Like you can make some times of the day that are no phone. So that way, at least you're decreasing and implementing some amount of time where they're away from the screens, and having discussions. And hopefully that does snowball a little bit into being off your screen a little bit more. And you just see where they're, I mean, every kid's different. You'll see where they're at. I mean, if they're having serious issues with it, then you can certainly work with a therapist or a practitioner to kind of talk about it. But don't shy away from the conversation, especially when we know that such a high percentage of kids have mental health concerns these days. I think it's something we have to assume could be an issue, and don't shy away from getting them into some therapy or talking about it if you have concerns, because therapists can be really helpful.
So what was the driving force for you writing your book, Parenting at Your Child's Pace? And what do you hope the biggest takeaway for your readers are?
So for my first book, for Parenting Your Child's Pace, the biggest real driver was I wanted to get ahead of chronic disease and really speak about all the issues that come up in the daily basis for those first 3 years that parents have, but really from an integrative, holistic perspective. And so that's why I wrote that book. And then for my new book that's coming out, Between a Shot and a Hard Place for Vaccines, I mean, the real impetus for that was I wanted to have debate and discussion. I felt like I couldn't talk about it. People are so frustrated they can't have discussions. They don't know where to turn to get unbiased information. And so I wanted to write that book. I wanted to write a book that doesn't tell people what to do, but really goes through what information that we know, doesn't shy away from the big controversies, talks about autism and sudden infant death syndrome and chronic disease, and how pharmaceuticals have got their tentacles into everything, and all the information about the diseases and the pros and the cons, and what we do know and what we don't know, and really just ask questions and really foster debate. And so that is what really led me to write this book, so we can talk about this. And it's been exciting. I wasn't sure, when I started this, where things were going to go. The world was quite different a year ago than it is now. And luckily, I think censorship is much improved.
Yeah.
Much improved. You could say the word vaccine on Instagram now, and it doesn't necessarily get taken down. So I think that's a really helpful thing. And with RFK being in power for good and bad, I think that the vaccine conversation is happening, which is great. And whatever you think about him and the new administration, doesn't matter to me. I mean, it's not political. Having discussions is what's important. And I think that he is bringing those discussions to light. And so it is a good time to talk about this.
So what about people that are listening and they very much stand in the middle where they don't know what vaccines to do. They feel that there may be some vaccines, but they want to go away and do their own research. Where is a good place for them to start?
My advice on that would be you have to look at multiple sources. So really at this point, let's say if you're going to read something that is already out there right now, you want to read something that's very, I would say, like pro-vaccine and kind of CDC or whatever your public health is. I mean, a lot of American books would be CDC based, so they're going to be very pro-vaccine. And then you want to read something that maybe shows the other side. And there are some good books out there like Turtles All the Way Down, The Vaccine Friendly Plan. Like these are the things that I had recommended to people in the past. So you kind of read both sides to get a perspective. Not that vaccines are totally bad or not that vaccines are totally good, but you get to see both things. Hopefully my book does a lot of that.
So when can we get the book?
So you can pre-order it right now. It's coming out in May.
Amazing. So knowing what you know now, Joel, how would you go about administrating vaccines in your own children if you do talk about that?
So I don't talk about my own kids ever because I think it's their health. They can talk about it one day if they want to, but in the office, nothing has changed because I don't think it should change. It should always be the same thing. Should lay out the information for parents and they should make the decisions that make sense for them. We have people in our office that do the regular schedule, people that do a slow schedule, and some that don't vaccinate. I would say the majority choose to do some sort of slow schedule. And as long as you're willing to come in and get all those visits, because it does end up being more visits, then that's a personal choice. There's a little risk if you're waiting longer for things, because obviously you can get exposed to something before, but for the most part, the risk is pretty small. So that seems to work well for a lot of parents, and they feel a little more comfortable just doing one at a time. But there is no specific way to do that. In the book, I laid out a few different things that people have done, but there is no slow schedule because no one's ever studied that. Again, these are the things we should be studying. We should be studying. If you do a slower schedule, does that decrease your risk of X, Y, and Z? That we should know that. We don't have that kind of information.
So I guess you touched on it earlier about the censorship and free speech. I'm wondering at what cost it's come to you as a professional that you've spoken out about, or even just spoken about the topics of vaccines and the fact that we are lacking certain studies. Has that come at you as a cost as a healthcare professional? Have you received much backlash?
Not yet. Not yet, but I have only started talking about it more recently. So I assume that it will, but it hasn't really affected me.
But perhaps it may not, because you're not saying do not vaccinate. You're saying do your own research and look into what's
maybe
individualized for yourself and your child.
I assume that it will. I assume that even saying that is controversial enough that it's going to cause some issues, but we will see. As this kind of unfolds and as people start to read the book, and we'll see. I don't know what to expect. I am 100% confident this came out a year ago. I would have been in a lot of trouble. I don't know what's going to happen now. I presume there'll be some fallout from it, but that is what it is.
And did you align that so that you could do it a year later, just in case there was a different political party?
No, I completed things much faster right now because I wanted to get it out now because I think the conversation's happening now. So I spent a lot more time. I would have probably, if nothing had changed, then you work at whatever pace you're going to work. It would have come out, I'm sure, like in a year or so from now. But I worked a lot more on it than I would have otherwise, because I feel like the time to talk about it is now. So I was able to work on it and get it out maybe 6 months faster than I would have otherwise, because I just wouldn't have rushed working on it as much.
Okay. And I know that you obviously work with the holistic practices. What practices do you want to see more of, or do you think is underestimated and people should look at doing more?
I believe, just in general, like anything that's natural or woo-woo or whatever out there, it's really not. And I think we need to incorporate those in. Number one would be nutrition. Diet, nutritionist counseling would be super useful. I think everybody should have that. Whether you want to call it physical therapy or exercise, like exercise counseling, I think would be super useful to have. Chiropractors, good ones, are amazing. So I think they can be super useful. Acupuncture. could be really, really helpful, and cranial psychotherapy. And there are a lot of other practitioners out there, but I think at a very, I guess, simplistic level, we need to incorporate nutrition and exercise into health, and we need a lot more counseling on that. And I think that would come from working in teams a little bit more. I've said this many times, but I feel like, well, I wish that medicine would move more towards kind of the way that dentistry does it, where you go in and you see your hygienist and they do your cleaning and they talk about your teeth, and then you see your dentist after for a couple of minutes and they check for the problems. Like medicine could do the same thing. We could go in, we could see a nurse practitioner, you could see a nurse, you could see a nutritionist, you could even do those things online before your visit, and you could have half an hour of nutrition counseling from somebody and then go see your doctor about other things after. I mean, these are things that are possible if we set it up in that way.
And when you were at university studying, how long or how much of your degree is associated to nutrition?
I mean, basically none. You're not.
That's crazy, isn't it? Because you are whatever you put into your mouth, whether you inhale it or you eat it.
So we certainly learned about nutrition in the sense of diseases, deficiencies. You learn a little bit here and there, but it's not a focus of medicine. Certainly, it hasn't been, and that, again, it's a crazy thing. I mean, it needs to become a part of medicine, but doctors are not going to spend an hour with patients. There just isn't enough doctors. So I think that we have to be reasonable with this, and we have to start incorporating teamwork and start identifying how important it is, teaching doctors about how important it is, and then having our system change somehow so that way it can be a part of these visits. And you don't necessarily need to spend 30 minutes talking to your doctor about nutrition, but it should be a part of your wellness care. And I think the only logical way to do that is you do that with somebody else that's part of the doctor's team.
And I often think that nutrition is quite overcomplicated, when really, I think you touched on it earlier. If you can pronounce it or you can say it, then you should eat it. So that's kind of tends to be a rule of thumb in my house. Like, we will have chocolate, but if the ingredients are cacao and sugar, not when there's 42 ingredients, I kind of think if it's an apple or it's a chicken, if it walked or swam the earth with vegetables, I kind of think that makes sense. And if we are going to be naughty, we try and go for, like I say, the ingredients that just do have sugar in it, but it's not got all of the preservatives and everything else that I suppose that they must be foreign to the body and even hard for them to break down.
I would think so. It's so hard to know with the chemicals in food because so many of them are just studied by the companies and we have no idea what they do to you or don't do to you. But I would say, just as a rule of thumb, common sense, just like you said, if it's real food, it's better for you than not real food. If it's words that you know, it's probably better for you than words that you don't know. If you go with that rule and you make as much food as you possibly can and you buy things that are actually real food, you're bound to minimize the chemicals you're exposed to, and that has to be a good thing. And I do believe that that's where we start with this, is we start to minimize the chemicals and the toxins that we're exposed to in the easiest way possible. And there's a lot that needs to be done over the long run, but at least from a family perspective, that is the place that you start, and you just cook more meals and you buy food that you know what it is. And I think that'll get most people a long way and decrease their exposure a little bit.
But I've seen some of the food in the canteens in the US that they give to children. I wouldn't even call that food, Joel.
No, it's not.
And then it's like they're creating patients for life because they're giving Ozempic to children over there. Am I right?
Also crazy. Yes, they are.
I know you're limited time, but what are your thoughts on Ozempic and Mounjaro?
I think it's a ridiculous place that we've come to, that we are so overweight and obese that we need a medication to try to improve that and to recommend that, as opposed to figuring out how we actually prevent this from occurring. I'm not against medicine. I think in the extreme case, in the extreme scenario, someone who's tried everything, who's extremely overweight, extremely obese, who's diabetic, who has all sorts of problems, that's moving in the wrong direction, that potentially is going to die soon, like that can be a life-saving thing to push them in a better direction. I think that's reasonable, but it should be a last step. It should not be, my kid's overweight, so therefore I'm going to take Ozempic and I'm going to have them lose weight that way, because it's a medicine, it's an injection. There are serious side effects. It's something you have to be on for life or for a very long time. That's crazy to be putting kids on anything like that when there are much simpler options of eating healthier and exercising. Like, it's insane to put a kid on a medication as opposed to that. We're not dealing with system level things. We're dealing with, here's a pill, and a prescription and a medication which has serious side effects, and let's just give our kids this for life. That is not the solution. That is the worst possible solution we could have. We should be spending that money on prevention and education and figuring out how we can go from 50% obesity to 40% obesity, not how we can go from we have this many kids on Ozempic to this many kids on Ozempic. It's just such a backwards thought process. And it's good to have medications that we know we can use as a last resort, but it should very much not be the recommendation for a 12-year-old that they get on Ozempic. And it certainly shouldn't be the recommendation for an adult who wants to lose weight. We should be incentivizing people through like, all right, you want to lose weight? Here's $1,000. Use it for a gym membership. Use it for healthier food. Like there are ways that you can use that exact same money to get to a healthier place and save these medications for the people that really do truly need it.
Yeah, because what you're doing with the medications, you're just treating the symptom. You're not treating like the actual problem.
Right. If you
don't
change the way you're eating,
yeah,
you might be skinny or unhealthy, but you're still going to be unhealthy. And the reason why you got there in the first place is going to continue. So when you're using a medication, it's often great if it's a bridge. If it's something's really problematic and you're in a cycle and you don't know how to break it, and this breaks your cycle and gets you eating healthier and thinking about things and moving in a direction that's much faster, that can be helpful. I don't have a problem with that. But that shouldn't be the focus. That should be the last resort, especially for a medicine like this, especially for kids. I mean, it's absurd that we're at this place as opposed to like, wow, we have such a big problem that we need to think about giving kids a medication. How do we overhaul our system so that we don't have this problem for kids? Because it was not a problem like this 50 years ago. Like it really was not.
Do you think it should be illegal to give children Ozempic or Mounjaro?
No, I don't think it should be illegal. I just think it shouldn't be the first thing that we talk about. I think that it's a medication, so it can be helpful for certain people in certain situations, but it shouldn't be talked about willy-nilly. Like it's like, oh, you're overweight. Here's the thing you should take. Like that. This should be like very, very strictly monitored and really given as a last resort, as opposed to what we're recommending as first line. It should be like fifth line.
Amazing. Well, listen, Dr. Joel, I know you're very busy and I know you've got a army of patients to see after me. But as you know, final question, the show is called Getting There, and it's about us all striving for our own destinations or oases of some kind. Where is there to you?
There to me is a place where kids are healthier and living longer than we're living and eating healthy food and moving, and we're not having to have these conversations anymore. We're just having open discussion and debate about everything, and nothing is really censored, especially when it comes to health, and let the best ideas win. So that is there for me. I mean, I hope that the book, the vaccine book, really is taken in that light and is not taken in any way as, pro-vax, anti-vax, whatever it is. I really hope that people take it as a starting point for discussion, so that way they can talk about vaccines with their family and friends and doctors, and not feel that they can't do that, and they can talk about drugs or taking heroin more than they can talk about vaccines. It's like it's a weird place we got to, and I hope that we get there. We get there. I have those discussions without fear.
Yeah, well, it looks like you're carving the way there for everyone else and bringing back the common sense crew. And what I love about you, Joel, is you're creating a safe space for debate and education and learning. So thank you so much for your time today. What we'll do is on the show notes, we'll add a link to your book. So I'll drop you a message for that. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, darling.
Bye.